now we're going to do a little bit of paint mixing, and I'm going to show you rather three different styles of mixing color that you can apply to your to the compositions, to your paintings that you're working on. I've again got a piece of the watercolor paper. I'm using the smoother of the two sides, which is the side that comes up when you open the the front of the paper. I tend to get just a little bit better luck with it. So the first thing we're going to do, I've switched now to a round brush, and a round brush is great. I use it probably 90% of the time. I can get I can flatten it out. I can kind of get larger areas painted. This is number 10 or number 12, which is I think is what you have. Somewhere around in there, and it can come to a point so I can do detail work as well. So when I'm not doing big washes, I'm typically using a round brush. So I'm going to go back into my water. I'm going to go back into our ultramarine blue again, and I'm going to kind of use this last well to mix up a color using the ultramarine, wash my brush out just a little bit, and this alizarin crimson. So these two colors. So I'm going to kind of make a little bit of a nice kind of a purpley, rosy, magenta sort of a thing. I'm getting relatively kind of that medium loose consistency. This is a little more like tea than honey, because we want it to be nice and smooth and even. So we want it to have enough water in it so that when we charge our brush, and that's what it's called when we load our brush with paint, when we charge our brush, we have enough in there to be able to do a good part of the work that we're trying to do. So I'm now going to paint. I'm going to paint a circle right up here, and I'm going to have to go back to the paint because you see I'm kind of out. But I'm working quickly, not ultra fast. But what I want to do is make sure that I get a nice even layer of this color laid down on my paper. But remember, we don't want to overwork it too much, because then we're going to start to get a little bit of weird blooms and things like that, where the water kind of comes out of the paint and it dries unevenly. And you'll find, I may have mentioned this, but you'll find with the this wood pulp type watercolor paper that it dries pretty fast. It doesn't give you a whole lot of open time, which is sometimes why you want to have just a little bit more water in your mix, knowing that it's going to be lighter. Watercolor is always going to dry lighter than you expect it to. So watercolor is all about layers, and so we want to make sure that we're learning how to layer, let it dry in between, unless we're doing some sort of effects. We're going to charge back into the wet paint with another color and kind of let those colors blend together. Unless we're doing that, we want to let those layers dry in between so that we're not pulling up that paint and kind of reworking and messing up what we had done just a little bit. So here's another method. I'm taking just straight ultramarine blue and I'm mixing it up to a pretty decent consistency there. So here's the next kind of a mix we're going to do. I'm going to paint another circle. Let's see how I do. Knowing that we don't want to overwork our watercolor paint, but trying to get a nice smooth round circle. That's the challenge here. You're trying to do both. So you see I'm kind of rounding out and kind of flattening off my brush. Do you see how when I rework that paint right there, I kind of brush back over it, how it lifts that paint back up? So that's what happens if you you continue to work and overwork too much. So while it's still, relatively wet, I'm not putting a lot of pressure on the page, just so I can get this color to kind of move around a little bit. So without doing that, I'm trying to improve how round my circle is. And then down at the bottom, I'm just going to kind of let that. You see, part of the benefit of having our paper on our board that's at slightly an angle, that water is going to want to come down to toward the bottom, and so if you leave a little paint sort of mid area here, it's going to want to flow down to the bottom of here. All right, Sean, stop, Mr. Overwork. All right, I'm going to leave that. So what we want to do is allow this to dry, because in this instance, as opposed to mixing the color in our palette, the two pigments together to create a color, we're going to layer one color on top of another, and we're going to see how does that change my perception of what that color is. So we're going to let that dry for just a moment, and as we do, I'm going to move my paints back down here. I'm going to start another one, and I'm going to start with blue again, and this time I'm going to give it, I want some good pigment strength, but I also want this to be pretty loose. So I've got kind of a loose paint mixture, so that maybe the color is maybe not quite as strong, but the paint is going to move a lot, which is kind of what we want to do. So I'm going to paint half of a circle here, half of a circle, using my sort of watery, thin mix of paint. I'm going to kind of do that relatively fast, and I want to get a lot of that paint on there. Now I'm going to mix up some alizarin crimson, and chances are, Sean, just like a good cook, you should have had this color mixed already, because you don't want it. You're dealing with dry time over here. So I'm going to get a little bit more color there, and I'm going to put those colors a little bit next to each other. You see how I'm doing that? Maybe that color kind of comes in there just a little bit. And now I'm going to grab my board, and I'm going to kind of move that around. You see how I'm getting those paints to sort of move around together? This may give me, can you see how they're starting to blend there in the middle just a little bit? So I'm going to mix up some more of my alizarin crimson, and I want the same strength paint. In other words, the consistency of my paint to be the same strength as what I applied the first time. And what we're going to do now is layer this alizarin crimson, or our red color, right on top. Tiny bit more water, right on top of the blue, of the ultramarine blue circle that we painted before. And you see, I'm really not, I'm not lifting up from underneath, and that means that my paint underneath is likely, it's dry enough so that I'm not lifting that paint up, because that would create some kind of runs and blooms, and sometimes we call them cauliflowers, or sometimes maybe you want that effect, but other times it will hinder you from getting the sort of the flat washes that you're interested in. So I've painted that on there as well, cleaning out my brush a little bit. Now I'm gonna grab a pencil, and I'm gonna say this was the mix in the palette. So I mixed that one straight in the palette, and we get the most even color, the most flat. In other words, this is the color we mixed because we put the two pigments straight together in our palette. This is, the sort of the flattest and the most even. This is red over blue. and the blue was dry. And let's give that another minute. I think by the time we finish up here, you'll see that that color is going to flatten out a little bit as the water dries out of it, and you'll see it be a little more flat color, a little closer to the color that we're kind of going for. And this one is this is sort of side by side, and we've allowed those colors to mix together in the middle. And I really like this one. This is certainly not appropriate for everything, but I really like the way these colors kind of mix together. You see there's still some paint pooling. That's going to give you a really dark line down there, and that may not be something that you want, so maybe you want to grab it and let it continue to flow back up and around. As we let this dry, this is going to dry a little more evenly. You're going to see the color right here in the middle kind of soften out and even out into a little bit more of this same color. Again, you see these colors are not the same. This is not the same purple that we mixed up there. But what you might find is that it's interesting because you're able to see the purple color that we've created. You're able to see a little bit of the blue that we started with. You're able to see a little bit of the sort of the reddish pink color that we overlaid on top in order to create this new color. So I'm going to give it just another minute through the magic of television. We're going to pause and let this dry, and then we'll come back and we'll see it when it's completely dry. Okay, so we given it a little bit of time to dry. You see we were relatively successful up here getting a nice smooth mix of color. It's a single relatively strong mix of the color when we took those two colors, ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson, and mixed them straight together. Here we did the red over the blue, and the blue, we let the blue dry, and you see it's kind of showing through, back in the background after we put the other color. So this is an interesting way to be able to get the feeling of this color, the idea of this color, but maybe it's a little more interesting in that we're able to see the colors we started from, and so it creates an interesting notion of the texture. So here's another one that don't adjust your set. This is one that I painted yesterday, but you can see that in the middle we get the sense of the new color, but you get a little bit of the alizarin crimson, and you get the ultramarine blue, to this side as well. And you see how that blue, this particular color blue, it's called a granulating color, and so you see how it kind of gives us that really interesting texture there. I think that makes for a really interesting work. Watercolor in particular, we use sometimes rough papers in order to be able to give the work that we do texture. So I like when that particular color granulates a little bit. So today we've gone through color mixing, mixing in the palette. Two colors layered on top of each other creates a third color, and this is taking two colors and kind of in a very wet mix, putting them side by side and just sort of letting watercolor do what watercolor does, which is sort of find those avenues and those channels for those colors to really work together. And we learned some techniques for washes, including a flat wash and a graded wash, and a couple of other different techniques in bringing the paint down the page in order to be great for skies, great for buildings if you're painting architecture, that sort of thing. So please take this opportunity to practice some color mixing, maybe get some other colors in there. See what those colors do when you layer them on top of each other. As a matter of fact, pick a set of complementary colors. Maybe you want to try ultramarine and burnt sienna. That's a great mix. Mix them together in your palette and paint it on and see what color you get. And then layer a blue down and then put the sort of orange color on top of it and see what color you get there. I think you'll find you'll get two very different colors, whereas here, because these colors are not complements, they're kind of creating that third color. I think you'll be interested to find what you'll see. So please practice your watercolor. See how you're getting those mixes down. And the more you sort of practice in technique, the more when you go to reach for a particular color because you're painting something specific or particular, you'll find that you're able to create those colors that you're looking for in your mind. All right, take care. We'll see you next time. Bye.